For some, liberation psychology was learned through graduate training. For others, it was growing up amidst activism. What happens when we ourselves, as therapists, cherish our identity and culture to challenge oppressive systems within mental health? This episode is a testament to resilience, authenticity, and the courage to carve your own path. Welcome to People of Color in Psychology, the show that explores mental health topics specific to culture, diversity, and communities of color. I am your host, Jack Zen. For our Arab American Heritage series, we are joined by Laila El-Asmar, based in Bethesda, Maryland, with over 25 years of clinical social work experience. She specializes in providing psychotherapy to adolescents, adults, couples, and families from diverse backgrounds. Laila earned her master's degree in social work from the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., and holds a bachelor's degree in sociology and Spanish from LaSalle University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Her extensive clinical training includes work in community mental health settings, psychiatry clinics, public schools, and hospitals. Additionally, Laila has comprehensive expertise in nutrition and integrative medicine for mental health and even serves as an end-of-life doula. Laila's identity deeply shapes her work. She values diversity and multicultural perspectives, allowing her to provide cross-cultural and liberatory therapy. Inspired by her family's legacy of human rights activism, particularly that of her father, Dr. Fawzi El-Asmar, a renowned Palestinian writer and advocate, Laila integrates principles of social justice, empowerment, and intersectionality into her mental health practice. As a first-generation Palestinian American, Laila will be discussing how she applies liberation psychology in her own clinical practice. Laila, it is such a pleasure to have you on our show today.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you so much for having me.
You know, a lot of people talk about liberation psychology, and sometimes it's too broad. When people think, wait, what does that mean? How do I even put that into clinical practice? So I'm really glad we're having this conversation. Also, from a Palestinian American perspective. So for our listeners, just so we're maybe in sort of we have a working framework for you, how would you describe liberation psychology?
Sure. All right. So for me, I guess how I kind of define liberation psychology is that it focuses on oppression and the impact that it has on the lives of people that are marginalized. And whether it's socially, economically, culturally, racially, and it's a way to help them kind of free themselves from that pain.
Hmm.
And so that kind of looks like, through kind of what we all think, therapy is. So like, talk, right? Dialogue. But that also involves like narrative therapy, creating their own stories and understandings. Sometimes it involves art. Sometimes it involves music. So it's a very versatile, I would say, way of providing psychotherapy.
Hmm. And at the core of it, as I'm hearing you describe liberation psychology, is addressing oppression.
Yes.
So it's like by tackling or addressing oppression, how we heal from it can take many different forms.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So let's share with, I guess, for many listeners as well as myself, sometimes we're always curious about how people apply certain practices in their own work. And you've been doing this for over 25 years. And so tell us and share with us some of the ideas and how you implement this as part of your ongoing clinical practice.
Sure. I think the largest kind of aha moments that I've had is when, unfortunately, social work in itself is a very oppressive system. And so when I kind of stepped into this field, I was like, well, I understand maybe this is how some people may practice, but I'm going to practice in this way. And there was a lot of emphasis on pathologizing our clients, patients. right? We call patients versus clients. And that never felt right with me. My role was a co-explorer in therapy versus a authority figure.
Mm.
And that's really how I approach all of my clients, is that I'm not here as a authority figure. I may know different ways of thinking about things, or let's have more of an understanding as to why you may feel this way, or you know what's happening where there is, you're constantly in this cycle of, it could be abuse, could be you know negativity, negative thoughts, but it's not to pathologizing them. It is more of, let's explore it.
Mm.
And I think that's a really different way of kind of the standard, what we all kind of think what therapy is.
So
Um,
it's not quick to label, oh, this is negative thought, and this is adding to, say, your depression or depressive thinking, your depressive cycle. It's taking an extra step and figuring out, well, how did this depressive thought come to be?
correct.
Yeah. For yourself, how you adopt liberation psychology in your own practice.
I would say, systematic oppression is very real. And to not examine that, to me, is really doing our clients a disservice. And really having this understanding of, what does it mean to be in a system where, whether it's work or school or community, where you do feel oppressed or marginalized, or like you really want to apply 3 times for this promotion, but you're still getting denied, denied, denied. And so to not understand what that whole system looks like really, to me, just doesn't serve our clients.
Mm. And I think because you have a social work background, many social workers are actually, I would say, have a leg up in looking at systems. So you gave great example, which is I hear you're helping clients. So, well, how come you're getting rejected 3 times? You know, well, I mean, are there sort of like pros and cons? Because if we say, hey, here's a system at fault, well, what do you do with that? Because the system is there is a role, right? The system
Hmm.
is trying to churn up certain people, certain
Yes.
behaviors. So what do you do with that?
So a lot of the times we can't do much, unfortunately, because it is beyond us. And so we have to understand that, this may, you know, what is it worth here? Is it worth continuing to apply and get rejected? Is it worth to maybe find another position, whether it's in the same organization or externally? But I think mostly it's understanding that, it's the understanding of oneself, and understanding that, there may be things that that person can do differently or needs to, change or adapt, and we can go there, but not all the time. And so then when it's something that's bigger than what we can change, then we have to look elsewhere. And I think that's extremely hard for many, many people.
Ooh, there's a bit of hopelessness. I'm feeling that.
No, I don't like that. But
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but the reality is, if it's not where you are, then you're going to be able to find it somewhere else. Or you can also create it depending on what that is, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you can start your own, you know, business of some sort. Kind of capitalizing on the fact that, okay, these systems don't work. I want to create a system. I want to be able to, be heard and understood in ways that I just haven't been able to really find.
Mm, mm. I do wonder, as we're having this conversation, how many therapists have exited certain systems to create their own group, to create their own
Oh yes.
environment. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. And if I could also just say that, even though in social work, yes, we do study systems and how everything is intertwined and relate, but liberation psychology, anti-oppression theory, all of this, I never studied because it was never offered. So I think even as a profession in social work, we have so much more that we need to really do. I think now schools are way more, open-minded, but when I was in school, it was very narrow.
Yeah. Yeah. May I ask when you first learned about liberation psychology? And I'll answer for myself. I mean, I didn't learn about it until starting this whole podcast, which is horrible. We
Yes.
never learned about it in grad school. We
Hmm.
never learned that, Ignacio Martin Barril is the creator. And he,
Correct.
this is in South America. And I'm
Yes.
like, wait a second. Why didn't we learn about this in our history of psychology class? It
Right.
baffles me.
Right. So, this is really a way that I've been practicing, and I never had names for it. I didn't have terms. I was like, well, this is just what I do. And because it's just innate, that's just how. And so when I started learning a little bit more about decolonization and Frantz Fanon in the 1960s and his whole, his book on decolonizing theory, I was like, oh my gosh, what is this? And then decolonizing therapy started, and then I was like, oh, there's this liberation psychology. And I was like, what does that mean? So we're talking like maybe like 2019-ish. I mean, it's not that long ago. So I was very excited to be able to have terms of, okay, this is not just what I do. It's also that there's reasons why. Like now that I have this, the psychological understanding as to why it's important to have people share their narratives and why, drumming, bringing, drumming into this or, painting or, just different styles of what I would say what therapy is to help somebody bridge pain or understanding of themselves.
Hmm. So let's take that idea of having folks share their stories and their influences. And as part of our intro, we've mentioned how your father, as well as your cultural background, has been a huge influence.
Yes.
Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so my mother came on the last boat from Italy at the age of 16, and my father came from Palestine. Well, he was a prisoner, or he was under administrative detention for 18 months, and Amnesty International was able to get him out of Israel. And he came to the United States giving a tour of lectures in like the mid 70s and ended up going to college. And we're talking, he was like 35 years old at that time. So went to college in Connecticut and met my mother there. And they got married, and then I was created. And my father's his whole life was dedicated to the Palestinian struggle. He wrote about 13 books. He was a poet. He was just a very just dedicated literally every part of his being. And so, I grew up in that. I grew up demonstrating in, the streets of DC since, I mean, I remember, being 5 years old, walking down Pennsylvania Avenue, and like that's just like that's how I, grew up. And he was the only one here. So all of my family is still there. So I'm very, very close with them. And I would go back often, and so being Palestinian is a huge part of my identity, and be going into social work because I really, with my own experiences, just felt like I had the ability to advocate and to be a activist, maybe not globally but individually, and that's how I kind of took what my role in therapy was.
Mm.
was kind of being that, you know, advocate and I lost my other word.
Change agent.
Yes, change agent. We can go with that. Yeah.
Wow, it's like I imagine, as a child, you're seeing this happening, you're seeing injustices, you recognize it, and you're also seeing, hey, we can play a part in righting the wrong.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I mean, I grew up, I remember having a lot of conversations when I'm like 10 years old, 12 years old, it being like, Dad, I don't like, why? Why, you know, do people hate us just because of, our nationality, and, our identity is controversial. And I'm like, it's so, I couldn't understand it. And the older I became and the more involved politically understanding and just, wanting to understand what's so horrible about being a Palestinian. Well, nothing, nothing. And then it kind of shifted into how much strength comes from being a Palestinian and how every Palestinian that I know, no matter if they've ever gone back home or they have, that live there or that live here, it is such a part of our identity because of that strength and that resilience that is just within us. And yeah, it
I-
really
I'm
gets
glad you.
past.
I'm glad you're even at 10. You're asking a question. Of the identity. What's wrong? Like right? It still to this day it shocks me that just by being a person of color, being a person of a nationality, that somehow it's just wrong. It makes absolutely no sense to me.
Right.
Um,
Exactly.
yeah. Uh, well, is there anything else you want to mention from that liberatory lens? Curious if you have other examples.
Yeah. So one is I have a client and we talk a lot about not fitting into, and he's first generation Palestinian and not, being too Arab for a American and being too American for an Arab and what having kind of a dual culture, what that means and how to bridge it. And there's a lot of like self-deprecation from this particular person and a lot of like, I have to, I'm 25 years old and I still, I have to be home by a certain time because he lives with his parents and, understanding, the cultural expectations, but being in the United States. And so how do we combine it or bridge it in ways that feel like we're still honoring our parents and our culture, but we also understand that we live in the United States and it's not like that at all. In the Middle East, most people do not leave their childhood home until they are married. And here in the West, that is not how it is. Usually, you go off to college and then maybe you come back, but maybe you don't. Right. And so with this particular patient, it was where there's just a lot of like understanding, like, like he would say things like, I just like, I don't fit in with my, American friends. I don't fit in with my, Arab friends. So like, so there's this feeling of I don't belong. And so I often have him kind of shift to, I hold the richness of two cultures within me. And having that, which is, a cognitive behavioral technique, but it's understanding that, well, you're right. You may not fit in the way that you're thinking, but you have two cultures that are, whether you want to, I mean, being Palestinian and being a American, and there's a lot of richness there. So let's kind of bridge that and at least start that dialogue with, I have the richness of these two cultures. So let me see how I can tackle this particular situation. So what does that look like?
Hmm.
You know?
So applying some of the cognitive reframe of
Yes.
embracing the two culture rather than trying to push out or reject one or the
One
other
or the other.
and saying
Yes.
I don't fit in. Well, yes, you're not only Palestinian, you're not only American, you're
Yes.
both. So creating a space to hold both and enjoying the richness of both these cultures.
Yes.
So yeah, thank you for that idea of taking in the understanding of the identity. Now we also you mentioned I think liberation psychology. How does that get brought up in say this particular example? I'm
Yeah.
actually
Well,
just curious.
yeah. No, so, I think if I was to go back to it, to my training, the oppressive piece would be, well, you are a American, so act accordingly. Instead of bridging your culture, whether it's Palestinian or wherever, instead of trying to forget that, because now all of a sudden, because you're born in America, you have to be an American. Well, what I don't even know what that means, to be honest, because American, to me is just so, broad. But that would be the oppressive side of it. The liberation psychology is going to kind of step in and say, well, wait a minute, you don't deny one or the other. We're going to bridge it and we're going to try to understand it. And we're going to be able to work together to create who you are.
Mhm.
And I
And,
think that's what that beauty is.
and I think there's this tone, this feel that I'm getting where you're creating the space for that dialogue as opposed to I'm pushing an agenda for you to be more American, if you will, which
Absolutely.
then we as a therapist become the oppressor. Um,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. Wow, wow.
Yes.
So you shared with us some of the memorable events that influenced how you got into social work. I'm curious, as a person of color, what were some challenges you faced and overcame that you would be willing to share?
Yeah, absolutely. So one is the nature of going to occupied Palestine, aka Israel, when I was growing up. Just the nature of going through the airport security for me was like already that, like, those moments as a 4-year old, as a 5-year old, as a 6-year old, just being strip searched, or being detained with my mom, like, so already as a child I was like, this is not okay and I don't understand. I always felt like that was something I had to do in order to go and see my family who I love, right? And then it kind of shifted. Then it became, growing up in the DC area, it's extremely international. So you have people from all over, which is amazing. And it wasn't until maybe, I don't know, I was about 12 years old. And one of my friends we were outside playing, I don't know, soccer or something. And she asked what I was doing for the summer. And I said, oh, I'm going to Israel to see my family. She goes, "Oh, I didn't know that you were Jewish." And I said, "Oh, well, I'm not. I'm Palestinian." And she looked at me and she said, you are what?" And I said, "I'm Palestinian." She goes, "Well, then we can't be friends." And I'm like, "I've known you since
What?
we were 8 years old." And that was the first time in the United States that I remember feeling, "Oh, this is very strange. This, like," so now someone who I've known, who's come to my house, who I've gone over to their house, all of a sudden now, because I'm Palestinian, no longer wants to be, you know, friends. And I went home and I told my father and my, mom. And, I grew up in a house that was extremely open-minded. My father had plenty of even Israeli Jewish friends that were pro-Palestinian. So I didn't grow up with this mentality of, they hate us, or these people don't, like, I didn't grow up like that. So all my experiences were from actual experiences from people. And I think that's really where this shift of this is not okay with me. Like, I don't have hate, even to the, soldiers that were, strip searching me at 6 years old. I know, like, they had, in my head at the time, like, well, this is their job. Why and all of that was a whole different story. I didn't understand that. But there was no hate there, So those were like those moments of like, oh wow, it's really controversial to be Palestinian. And then what does that mean? Like, how do I like, what is my identity? Am I, ashamed? Am I, do I, you know, not say where I am from? And for many, many years, I wouldn't say off the bat that I was Palestinian. I would say I'm half Middle Eastern, half Italian. And so, because I was like, if they really want to know, then they will ask me, well, from which country? And then I will say it. But I was always like, I don't know how people are going to react. I no longer am, and I'm extremely proud. So that doesn't, happen. But there were plenty of times that I didn't want the reaction.
So, what was the shift like to make that decision to overcome that? You know, originally it was it's hurtful. I mean, like you said, thinking back to
Yeah.
these experiences, especially a childhood friend, I think that carries more meaning and weight as opposed to the airport security. That
Hmm.
is just frightening. That creates a whole nother element of trauma. Then
Yes.
there's the relationship with a friend. And then for you to understand at such an early age or try to wrestle with, reconcile with that at such an early age, continuously, like you said, going through experiences where you're guarding, protecting yourself, not sharing immediately that you're Palestinian, and then finally making that shift. What was it that allowed you or helped you make that shift?
I would say the summer of 97, I lived in the West Bank. I was doing a study abroad program, and I lived in this girls' dorm, which was great. And it was the best summer, the best summer. And it was like, I am so with my people. Like I never, right? So I was like, what, like 19, and making friends and living in the West Bank and feeling just so Palestinian and just feeling so, it was this collective, it was the community that I had always wanted, and being from two cultures plus Americans, so really three, and just trying to navigate all three and those expectations. And and it was like when I was living, I was like, this is amazing. I am extremely proud. It's such a beauty. I mean, the culture itself is, on every level is just so beautiful. And I see that within me. And that was really that turning point where I was like, I will never not be proud. Now, as I say that, there are times in my practice where I do not necessarily come out right away and say I'm Palestinian. Again, living in the DC area, and this is even before the last like year and a half, 18 months, I just felt like if it wasn't needed, why start something? And so professionally, there's been a shift from where that kind of thinking to where I am now professionally. So even in the last like 18, 19 months since October 7th, there's been another shift where my patients all now know that I'm Palestinian because it's something that I talk about, not in session, but with our current administration. And I see a lot of federal workers, and so kind of talking about this in a more global aspect. So that's also been another shift.
Wow. Well, thanks for sharing that with us. So, part of the challenges you faced as part of being a person of color and how you overcame that was actually listening more to who you are and really fostering and further developing that identity of being a Palestinian. So, for you, what does it mean to be a first generation Palestinian American therapist?
Yeah. So I could not have chosen a better profession than I have chosen. And I think the beauty of being multicultural and having such a strong Palestinian identity has only helped me become a better therapist and understanding my own struggle and identity and being able to really, to foster that and to examine that and to bridge it within other people. Yeah, I think that's a huge reason why. I mean, my caseload, it's such a multicultural caseload, which I hear from my other colleagues is extremely rare. And I am so happy and just blessed, honestly, that people from, all walks of life, kind of come in and are willing to be open and vulnerable. But they're also looking for someone to, I think, to understand what it's like to be marginalized and what it's like to be discriminated against and what it's like to, feel like you're, screaming out to the world, but no one is, listening. And then having and creating that space where, no, we are going to listen. And we're not just going to listen, we're going to take action, whether that's within us, whether that's in your career, whether that's in your personal life. So, yeah,
Yeah. There's a greater sense of empathy.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Layla, how can we support you?
Well, I think my go-to is keep talking about Palestine. That is a huge piece here in whatever capacity that may be, whether it's, on social media, whether it's going to see, various films that have been banned or not being shown or reading books
No other
or
land?
listening.
Yes.
Yes, no other
Mhm.
land. I think, yeah, that I would say that's the biggest piece. And continuing to educate ourselves and to learn
Yeah.
about, the world and how important mental health is in our world.
Yeah. Well, Layla, thank you so much for your time. Any final thoughts?
No, no, thank you so much for putting this out. It means a lot to our community. I can
You
tell you that
bet.
much.
You bet.
Yeah. So thank
Uh,
you.
Again, thank you so much for, your work and really having this wonderful conversation with me as well as our listeners who want to learn more about how therapists are applying liberation psychology as part of their work. And I think, particularly in your unique perspective, tying and linking that cultural history from a Palestinian perspective is so important. And so, really, thank you so much for the wonderful conversation today.
Thank you very much, Jack. I appreciate it.
A huge thank you to our listeners. If you enjoyed this episode, please share and subscribe to People of Color in Psychology. You can also support us by registering for continuing education courses or making a one-time donation on the Multicultural Counseling Institute's website. Your feedback is important to us, so feel free to send an email, a message on LinkedIn, or leave a voice message on our website. Until next time, this is your host, Jack Sun.